We now have a Sonic the Hedgehog cinematic universe, with 3 films, a TV show, and a 4th film on the way. I don't think anybody could have predicted that the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise would be at the place that it is right now, with the franchise as a whole going through a massive renaissance, but especially with the movie franchise, which had probably one of the worst first impressions of all time in 2019.
Today. Oh my god, what is that? Oh my god! What is that?
But thanks to that rebound of redesigning the character, they were able to release the film in February 2020 to massive success. But that year of 2020 is very significant because at that point, Sonic the Hedgehog was around for essentially 30 years at that point. With 5 television series under his belt, 2 long-running comic book lines, video games upon video games, merchandise everywhere, Sonic the Hedgehog is still yet to receive a theatrical adaptation. But it wasn't for a lack of trying. There have been many attempts to get Sonic the Hedgehog movies off the ground, many I'm sure you're aware of. There's at least one cancelled Sonic movie for every decade the franchise has been around for. Sony's Sonic movie that they were struggling to get in the works in the 2010s, Ken Pender's Sonic movie Sonic Armageddon from the early 2000s, and of course a very popular one, Sonic Wonders of the World from the early 90s. All of these films are typically the usual suspects that come up when it comes to discussing cancelled Sonic movies, Wonders of the World being the most popular, as it's typically regarded as the first attempt at making a Sonic the Hedgehog film. This is where the Sonic fan base is mistaken. What if I were to tell you there's another cancelled Sonic movie that predates Sonic Wonders of the World that nobody seems to talk about? I wouldn't blame you guys for not knowing this, as all the details were kept under wraps for literal decades. This info didn't become public until 2024 from a very small source on Twitch. User The Game Show Game purchased the only physical known draft of the script on eBay, and for the 4th anniversary of Paramount's Sonic the Hedgehog film, the document was presented live on February 12th, 2024. All of this info seems to have gone under the radar, and nobody talks about how this is the craziest, weirdest, most insane Sonic the Hedgehog film you could ever imagine. A film so insane, Sega immediately shut it down upon presentation. So in this video today, we're going to take a look at the first ever cancelled Sonic the Hedgehog movie that you've never heard about, the development, the story, and eventually why the film was cancelled. So without any further ado, let's talk about Sonic the movie. The year is 1993, and Sonic the Hedgehog is on top of the world. The franchise is hot off of an amazing trilogy on Sega Genesis and Sonic CD, 2 television series running simultaneously, a McDonald's tie-in Happy Meal, a new comic book line, and the merchandise train started to get going. With Sonic already tapped into all of these various different media markets, it was only natural that the franchise would head to the big screen. The first conceptualizations for a Sonic film started during the production of the Sonic TV series by Deke in 1993. Michaelian Risley, who was instrumental in the green lighting of the Sonic TV shows, was assigned to negotiate with various Hollywood studios to find a distributor and producer for the film. She came from the film world, hence why Sega wanted her to take on this task, with her now being at the company as a consumer products director. But there were some conflicting ideas at Sega. Sega of America CEO Tom Kalinske was not in favor of taking Sonic to the big screen. Tom was the former CEO of Mattel and was instrumental in the launching of the Masters of the Universe franchise, an extremely lucrative brand with a long-running television series and toy line. But in 1987, they released the Masters of the Universe movie, which went on to be a critical and commercial failure, completely tarnishing the Masters of the Universe brand and has left it in a state of 1980s nostalgia purgatory to this day. That, on top of the critical and commercial failures of Super Mario Bros. And Street Fighter films, both based off of video game franchises, he didn't want Sonic to go down the same route. With the franchise being in its infancy around 2 years into its run at this point, the risks far outweighed the rewards, and once when Sega heard Tom's reservations, they respectfully agreed with him and didn't proceed with the Sonic movie, and everyone lived happily ever after. Just kidding, that's not what happened. Sega was very enthusiastic about the idea of getting a Sonic the Hedgehog movie in theaters, according to Risley. From a boardroom perspective, I understand wanting to strike while the iron's hot with Sonic, but reportedly they didn't really care about the film failing. Their main concerns were mainly timing, the look of the movie, and whether they went live action or animation. And after around a year, these things would start to be hashed out, as Sega struck a development deal in August of 1994 with MGM and Trilogy Entertainment Group. As a result of this deal, reveal, Trilogy Entertainment co-founders Penn Densham and Richard B. Lewis wrote a rough story treatment for a Sonic the Hedgehog movie, which they titled Sonic the Movie. The plot as presented in the draft was intended to introduce a new mythology to the movie-going audience, and serve as an origin story for Sonic that viewers who hadn't played any of the games yet could enjoy, while also providing a real sense of jeopardy, similar to that of Batman and Jurassic Park. As described earlier, one of the biggest things that Sega was wrestling with was how to do the movie, and specifically how Sonic was going to appear in the movie. Well, according to the document, Sonic's appearance in the movie was planned to be a combination of animatronics, motion capture, and CGI, and after a few months, the first draft of the treatment was submitted on November 11th, 1994. Now, what did this treatment hold? Let's take a look at Sonic the Movie.
Disclaimer. This portion of the video uses AI-generated images to visualize the story. While I don't support AI art replacing human-made art, using AI was the only way to bring this video to life within my creative and resource limitation. These images are intended purely to enhance the storytelling experience.
On an uninhibited tropical island, a terrified man dashes through the dense jungle. The man is pursued by several strange snake-like creatures with wolf-like heads, seemingly being guided by music played by a mysterious stranger nearby. The running man inevitably trips and is grabbed by the snakes and dragged into a pit lined with mushrooms and human skeleton remains. The man remains defiant towards the malicious stranger, who in response commands a grate in the pit to open. An ape-like creature with a second head implanted into its forehead then lunges out, seemingly devouring its defiant victim. That's one hell of a way to start a Sonic movie. In an entirely different urban area, 17-year-old Jimmy Hedgeman, his friend, and two teenage girl passengers speed down the street in their car. Jimmy's friend occasionally sips from his can of illicit beer. The car then hits a dip and is momentarily tossed airborne, prompting a police officer to pull the group over for their reckless driving. Jimmy's friend attempts to hide his beer can, while Jimmy tries to think up an excuse so as not to receive a third traffic violation. The cop is sympathetic to Jimmy's pleading and offers to let him go without checking his registration. In his haste to leave the officer, Jimmy opens the glove compartment without thinking, revealing the hidden beer. The officer takes notice and drags Jimmy to the police station, claiming he will keep him there until his father arrives. In his research laboratory, Jimmy's father, Dr. Hedgeman, performs his government-funded experiments on the DNA of plant and animal life, hoping to unlock the mysteries of the DNA puzzle, specifically a section of the strand that can repair and replicate itself. He deduces that plants and some hibernating animals go through a special phase where their DNA internally repairs itself. His research is interrupted by a call from Jimmy at the police station. Jimmy and his father exit the station and drive away in silence. Jimmy turns on the radio but is unable to settle on a channel to listen to. Dr. Hedgeman turns it off again, frustrated with his son's recent actions. After arriving back at his lab, Dr. Hedgeman orders Jimmy to stay outside of the main testing room while he continues a promising experiment. Jimmy protests but ultimately gives in and heads to the lab's office instead. Dr. Hedgeman checks on a plant he injected with the serum earlier and noticed that the formerly dead plant is now alive again. Excited by the success, he begins recording the results on a tape recorder. Meanwhile, Jimmy gives a small hedgehog test subject named Squeakers a tour of the lab to keep himself occupied. Jimmy's father then returns and angrily tells Jimmy to stop, berating him for his immaturity, stubbornness, and overall lack of accomplishment. Jimmy retorts that his grandfather tried to make his mark on the world by breaking the sound barrier and was killed as a result. The fight is interrupted when Dr. Hedgeman receives a call from his boss. Jimmy leaves the lab in anger. With the fight over, three disguised individuals outside enter the lab and make their way to Dr. Hedgeman's testing room under the claim that they are maintenance workers. Once inside, they block the room's door and unplug its phone, ignoring Dr. Hedgeman's protests. Having forgot his backpack when he left, Jimmy returns to the lab and notices the commotion, hiding in a lab cabinet to observe it. One of the thugs named Face reveals he's aware of Dr. Hedgeman's research and presents a high-paying job opportunity from his boss to continue his DNA research under him. Dr. Hedgeman refuses, however, and Face pushes over the cabinet that Jimmy is in anger. Face then sprays Dr. Hedgeman with a chemical gas, causing him to pass out, while Jimmy is trapped in the cabinet, now filled with spilled liquid and glass shards from the broken bottles. He notices a shard of glass dripping with a blue liquid and sticking into his hand. He painfully pulls it out and experiences blurry vision and strange odors for a short period, before they mysteriously fade. All the while, Face and his two cohorts talk in a foreign language while loading Dr. Hedgeman's unconscious body into a crate, which they take out of the lab with them. Jimmy manages to escape the cabinet and pursues the three men, but loses them when they load the crate onto a boat. Jimmy then rushes to the police station in an attempt to report the crime, but is unable to form an understandable sentence as a result of his speech pattern mysteriously accelerating to 150 miles per hour. The police officer who pulled him over earlier recognizes him and attempts to arrest him, but Jimmy runs outside and gets into a car chase with the officers. While driving, he notices streaks of blue in his hair, but they quickly vanish. A cop pulls in front of him to try to cut him off, but Jimmy crashes into the cop car and escapes by leaping over its hood with a burst of speed. He sneaks back into his father's lab, finding that it looks like it did before the kidnapping. He frantically begins searching searching for evidence, finding both a bottle of hedgehog dormant DNA and a tape recorder that his father set up before being kidnapped that captured the men's conversation. He sits on the floor wondering what he should do as he stares at a picture of his grandfather. He goes to the house of his Spanish teacher, Mrs. Deanhammer, and shows her the tape recorder and tells her his father was kidnapped. She's frustrated with him for not only waking her up at 3 a.m., but because he hasn't shown up to her class in the past 3 months. She assumes Jimmy is trying to prank her, but after realizing he's not going to go away, she tells him that it sounds like the men are speaking a Peruvian dialect of Spanish and they're mentioning the name of a town, along with showing him a map of South America. She heads into the kitchen and Jimmy looks over the map, realizing the men are talking about a small lake. He goes to tell her what he's learned, but he overhears her talking to the police and runs away. In another part of the world, Dr. Paul Ellison, the man who hired Face to kidnap Dr. Hedgeman, is just informed they've been successful. He goes to see Hedgeman, who's unconscious and strapped to a gurney, and wakes him up by injecting him with the serum. Upon waking up, Hedgeman recognizes Ellison, the genius who created synthetic blood and made a fortune off of it, but supposedly died 10 years ago. While talking to Hedgeman, Ellison removes his fingers from his right hand and sets them on the table, revealing him to have been born without fingers and using robotic prosthetics. He tells Hedgeman how he was given primitive metal fingers as a boy, and he was mocked by others with the nickname Claws, and that even though he was a talented violin player dubbed the Fingerless Virtuoso, he will still come to his shows to thank God they weren't like him. While he talks, the robotic fingers crawl towards Hedgeman and try to suffocate him, only for Ellison to call them back. He tells Hedgeman that he'll be free to go as soon as he helps complete Ellison's research. Meanwhile, Jimmy, having stolen his father's jacket and credit card, books a flight to Peru. His injured hand is now in a sling, which he uses as an excuse for the signature not matching. He's led to his first class seat, where he smuggles some mini liquor bottles off of the drink cart and asks for a Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. The attendant, while disgusted, brings him the magazine. As he looks through it, blue fur begins to sprout from his hands. Adrenaline, whether from nervousness or excitement, causes the serum to accelerate. Panicking, he rushes to the airplane bathroom, but when he tries to shave off the fur, it just grows back. He splashes himself with cold water and knocks out the bathroom light while trying to grab a towel, leading to him transforming in the dark. After a struggle to calm down and change back, Jimmy walks out of the bathroom and sits on his hands for the rest of the flight. Arriving at the airport, Jimmy is met by a duo of con artists who offer to take him to a river that'll lead him to the lake. A beggar warns him not to go with them, but he ignores them and is driven down to the river, the men joking the whole time and attempt to make Jimmy lower his guard. When they arrive at the river, they steal Jimmy's backpack and shove him into the water, knocking him unconscious as he's washed downstream. Jimmy is barely able to swim to the shore of a mangrove swamp, frightened by the bizarre sounds he hears. He picks up a rock to defend himself, only to be distracted by a collection of worms underneath it. The compulsion overcomes him and he eats the worms, then spots his reflection in the water and jumps back in shock when he sees himself as a strange creature. All of a sudden, he's charged by an unknown beast and begins running, the adrenaline causing blue hair to grow on his palms and face. After a close call, he manages to climb up a tree, where the reality of the situation hits him and he vomits. Changing back, he attempts to calm himself down, but is all of a sudden grabbed from behind and knocked out. Back at Ellison's lab, he's giving Dr. Hedgeman a tour of his facilities, which are built into the side of a volcano and powered by tubes of lava running throughout the building. He brings Hedgeman to a room and, using a fingerprint scanner and verbal code, activates a holographic model that he uses to explain his goals to Hedgeman. Ellison says he wants to remove the sins and imperfections of humanity, using his ability to manipulate DNA to change humans and animals into the perfect organisms. He states Hedgeman's work is only steps away from what he's done, and that's why he needs his help. Meanwhile, Jimmy wakes up on the island to find himself in a makeshift stretcher being carried by a mutant creature. He tries to move but realizes he's tied up and has a knife held to his throat by Amanda Morgan, a 16-year-old girl. They arrive at the edge of a cliff and throw Jimmy off into a pit of sharp rocks, only for him to be caught by a net a few feet off the ground. The net belongs to Kentar, a large and incredibly strong mutant that was one of Ellison's early experiments. Jimmy nicknames him Knuckles because of the fact that his arms drag on the ground. Kentar and Amanda take the captive Jimmy to a village populated by mutant creatures, bringing him to the village elder Taticus, who after looking Jimmy over says a good fisherman only keeps what they can use, which causes the mutants to erupt in joy as they interpret it as being allowed to kill Jimmy. Ellison continues to give Dr. Hedgeman a tour of his facility, eventually entering a highly guarded section called the Zoo of New Creatures. This area contains heavily monitored cages full of mutants, with their every movement and thought being tracked. Ellison explains that the problem with the mutants is their inability to obey. Demonstrating this is by placing food in a cage and telling the creatures to let only one of them have it, only for them to immediately begin fighting over it. He pleads with Hedgeman that he's simply attempting to create a better world, leaving Hedgeman conflicted. Ellison dismisses him, and as soon as he leaves the room, laughs about how easy the doctor was to fool before pressing a button to destroy all the mutants used in the demonstration. Back in the mutant village, Amanda interrupts Taticus's meditation to beg for Jimmy's life, arguing that she's seen him transform and that he should at least be allowed to take the test. Taticus thinks on the idea before agreeing to let him take the test at dawn, but warns her of what might happen if he fails it. She goes to bring food to Jimmy, lying beaten on the floor of a hut, but calling him Sonic. As he picks at his food, Min explains that if he's able to pass the test, the mutants will be able to let him live, but if he fails, it will be the end for him. Throughout this, she continues to call him Sonic, Jimmy being confused until realizing she's seen the word on the back of his jacket and thinks it's his name. He tries to tell her what his real name is, only for Amanda to ignore him and explain what he's been going through in an attempt to get her to help him, but to no avail. He stares out a window and watches the mutants challenge each other with various feats of bravery. A young mutant named Bowler challenging Knuckles and immediately losing, slinking away in shame. Jimmy realizes that not only are the creatures far stronger than he is, but they're also not too different from him. However, as the sun sets, the villagers become more and more distressed, the sound of violin music spreading across the island causing them to run inside and lock up in their homes. Ellison overviews his newest creations, a collection of snake-like creatures, unhappy with how they are developing. One of the technicians tells them that they're refusing any food that isn't alive, to which Ellison releases them onto the village, telling them to bring back 10 living specimens and that he doesn't care what happens to the others. As dawn rises on the island, Kentar waits for Jimmy in the middle of a large platform of rocks and tree stumps surrounded by water. Jimmy is pushed onto the platform as he tries to argue against this, but Amanda reminds him it's his only chance. Kentar and Jimmy begin fighting, with Kentar easily overpowering him. He holds Jimmy underwater as Amanda begins to panic. However, Jimmy transforms into Sonic and is able to turn the fight around. Right as it seems like he's about to win, however, Ellison's snake mutants emerge from the forest along with 2 helicopters. The snakes herd the villagers as the helicopters drop nets on them, tearing Bowler from his mother and almost capturing Amanda. Kentar tries to free Amanda but is knocked to the ground by 2 of the snakes. Jimmy runs over and saves both of them, running away with Amanda into the forest. Amanda leads him down the stream to her private garden, a secluded spot on the island filled with rare and exotic flowers. She explains to Jimmy that Ellison releases his creatures into the island to feed on the mutants. Jimmy asks her more about Ellison, and she confesses that her father used to work for him, but after quitting he hid her on the island before later vanishing. She says she wants the mutants to leave the island so that they can be safe, as they're her only family, but they refuse to leave, so she reluctantly stays. Jimmy realizes how brave she is and that he loves her. However, looking down at his still blue hands, he wonders if anyone could love him now that he's part mutant. Face leads the captured mutants, including Kentar, into Ellison's biolab. A helicopter pilot from the raid gives Ellison an image disc which has a photo of Jimmy on it. Dr. Hedgman noticing it and trying to focus more on his work so he doesn't react outwardly. Ellison picks up on a shift in demeanor and, furious that an outsider is on the island, kills the helicopter pilot in front of Hedgman before explaining that he couldn't let him live due to his imperfections. He then orders Face to bring him Jimmy, to which Kentar speaks up and reveals that Jimmy can change between human and mutant. Ellison becomes excited as he believes that this could be the genetic information he needs, and Knuckles offers to bring Jimmy to him if he lets the rest of the village go, to which Ellison agrees under the condition of a 24-hour deadline. Still held captive in his room, Hedgman paces back and forth as he tries to figure out a way to escape. Food's brought into the room and he throws it onto the floor, the fork landing under the bed and causing him to notice a leather belt wrapped around the bed frame. Unlatching it, he realizes that there's symbols forming some kind of code on the belt. He sneaks into the room containing the holographic chamber, using a gas Ellison left behind to bypass the fingerprint scanner before saying the code he found on the belt. Saying it causes a hologram revealing Ellison's true plans to display. He intends to replace humanity with genetically engineered half-human, half-animal creatures, doing so via harnessing the energy found in the dormant volcano his base is in, and using it to shoot the mutating and replicating DNA into the atmosphere, where it will then contaminate the water supply, wiping out imperfections and allowing everything that survives to be altered by him. The only issue is that he doesn't have control over human DNA. Back on the island, Jimmy decides to go and rescue the other mutants and his father, along with trying to find a cure for himself. He convinces Amanda to join him, and the two gather some of the remaining mutants hiding in the forest, all of which are convinced Jimmy is bad luck and that he caused the raid. Amanda pleads with them to stand up for themselves against Ellison the way Jimmy is, and a small group of mutants eventually sides with her. Kentar watches from the shadows, intending to tell Ellison about their plans. Jimmy and his team make it to Ellison's compound, which has a dozen different entrances and paths, leading them to guess where they need to go. However, Face and some security guards manage to find them, causing everyone to run away after Jimmy fails to change into Sonic, albeit with a few of the mutants being shot and unable to escape. Jimmy's distraught and blames himself for everything, causing Amanda to bring Tadakis to him for advice. Jimmy says he's afraid he's infected with something and dying, to which Tadakis says he's dying into something new, and that he needs to accept the changes that have happened to him. He tells Jimmy that he has to come to terms with the animal inside him, and that he believes Jimmy will lead them all to freedom. Tadakis heads back up to the cliff to meditate, where Face interrogates him about where Jimmy is, hitting him and threatening worse if he doesn't tell him. Tadakis continues to stay quiet, leading to Face becoming fed up and shooting him, Tadakis' body falling off the cliff. Kentar finds his body and becomes furious, realizing Ellison had broken his promise to not harm any of the villagers before the 24-hour deadline. He scoops up his body and brings him back to the village. Amanda realizes that they're running out of time, that she has to keep training Jimmy, to which he refuses, only for Kentar to say he refuses to let Jimmy give up, and that Ellison's plans go further than the village, potentially affecting the whole world. At that, Jimmy agrees, going through a training montage montage as Sonic, where he learns to control his powers, and concluding with Amanda giving him Taticus's final test to prove that he's ready. Jimmy, Amanda, and Kentar come up with a plan to break into Ellis's compound and free the mutants and Jimmy's father, thanks to the help of a crude map Knuckles drew of the compound's interior. Jimmy has a few close calls but manages to escape detection from the guards, albeit at one point he realizes the map is wrong and manages to course correct. He finds where the mutants are being held, a dark pit covered in the snake creatures from before. Jimmy takes out the snakes and frees the mutants, bringing them to a drop-off point that Amanda and Kentar set up before going back inside for his dad. He destroys one of the lava tubes running through the interior, distracting the guards and allowing Amanda and Kentar to escape with the others. The guards run after Sonic before he runs down a tunnel, assuming he'd lose them, only for Face to appear and knock Jimmy out, dragging him to Ellison. Jimmy wakes up strapped to a table and hooked up to a machine that samples his blood every 2 minutes in order to detect changes. Jimmy demands to know where his father is, to which Ellison reacts with delight at learning that he's Hedgeman's son. Ellison explains that now that he has Sonic's blood, he can complete his plan and transmutate all of humanity into more disciplined creatures, causing Jimmy to call him Robotnik, in reference to his cold and mechanical methodology. Ellison plans to vivisect Sonic in order to figure out what allows him to change back and forth, keeping Hedgeman captive nearby to make sure Jimmy obeys him, as he says he will suffer if Jimmy doesn't cooperate. Ellison begins a series of tests on Sonic's blood, managing to create his mutated DNA and preparing to shoot it into the atmosphere. Seeing as they've outlived their use to him, Ellison orders Face to get rid of both Jimmy and Dr. Hedgeman, leading to them both being thrown into the pit. The two-headed mutant from the cold opening appears and begins to approach, with Jimmy and Dr. Hedgeman desperately trying to find a way out through the maze-like caves. The two are cornered and have a moment before the ceiling breaks open to reveal Amanda and Kentar, who pull the two up to safety with a rope. Jimmy goes to stop Ellison from contaminating the planet, with the others following behind him. Ellison's men appear one by one and attempt to take out Sonic and fail, including Face. Amanda gets concerned. Hedgeman attempts to send out an SOS and Kentar fights the snake creatures as Jimmy goes for Ellison. Sonic manages to knock him to the ground, but Ellison takes one of the DNA capsules and transforms into a gigantic mutant. Sonic manages to dodge for a while, but eventually Ellison knocks him out, then goes to put the two remaining DNA capsules into the launch tubes and presses a button releasing the built-up steam from the volcano in order to launch the capsules into the atmosphere. Sonic manages to get back up and goes for Ellison again, only to be thrown off. Out of options, he converts all of his energy into his spin breaking through the launch pad, sending all the energy into the core of the volcano and reawakening it. Ellison begins to panic as the heat from the proper eruption would destroy the DNA in the capsules before they even leave the cone. The volcano violently rumbles as Ellison desperately tries to find a way to save his experiment, his lab disintegrating around him. Jimmy, Dr. Hedgeman, Amanda, and Kentar manage to escape from the compound at the last minute and see it fall into the volcano, which erupts a moment later. The mutants come out of hiding, overjoyed at the news of Ellison's defeat. The help that Dr. Hedgeman called for earlier arrives to help evacuate the island, and Dr. Hedgeman tells Jimmy that he's proud of him, and he's sorry that he didn't believe him earlier. Jimmy apologizes as well, as they still got problems on their hands, ending with the line, "You thought it was tough raising an ordinary teenager? You ain't seen nothing yet." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the long but summarized script for Sonic the movie. Remember when I said that this was gonna be weird? I wasn't lying. After turning in the script and story treatment, it seemingly received negative reactions from both MGM and Sega for its tone and incredibly loose connection to the games. As a result, this version of the film was just straight up cancelled, and a more accurate film adaptation of the Sonic franchise was pitched as a follow-up. There is really no greater or deeper end to this story. This film was just an immediate no. And I think after the past 20 minutes of breaking down this film's story, you understand why. This is just not accurate to the Sonic franchise. There's of course some things that tie in here, like yeah, you have Sonic, Knuckles, and Dr. Robotnik technically, but those three characters are only referred to as their names a handful of times, and Jimmy only turns into Sonic a handful of times throughout the movie. It seems like Kentar/Knuckles would have stayed in his mutant form the entire time, but we haven't even gotten into what these character designs might have looked like. If the story is this weird and unfaithful, imagine what the character designs might have looked like. I have no reason to believe that this would have been faithful to the Sonic that we saw in the 90s. In fact, based on what we know about this movie, I'm sure the character designs would have been so disgustingly unfaithful and ugly that 2019 Sonic would vomit. I'd go out on a limb and say outside of the coloring, they wouldn't look like Sonic, Knuckles, or Eggman at all. Speaking of Knuckles and Eggman, found on the story treatment were notes of complaints that the antagonist should be more like Dr. Robotnik, and that the movie version of Knuckles is nothing like the canon version, and that they should make some changes to make them more faithful to the source material. This is clearly a script by writers who don't don't know a lot about Sonic, don't really care about Sonic, and just wanted to really do their own thing. But honestly, I can't really blame them too much. Sonic was only around for a few years at this point, with the franchise launching in 1991 and having this script treatment written in 1994. There's not only not too much to go off of, but it's almost impossible for somebody to have a deep fondness for this franchise or nostalgia back then in the way that you could have nowadays with Sonic, with the franchise having over 30 years of history. Now, I'm not gonna lie, as someone who was born in 2002, almost 10 years after this film was proposed, part of me would have liked to look back on a live-action CGI animatronic hybrid Sonic movie, just in a complete abomination and product of its time, how people kind of look back on that old Mario movie from back in the day. I always kind of wanted that for Sonic, but of course, this being the first Sonic the Hedgehog movie could have completely altered people's perception of the franchise. But of course, that didn't happen. We wouldn't see a Sonic movie for another almost 30 years. But MGM and Sega wasn't going to stop trying. They had another movie up their sleeve. But what was that? We'll talk about that in the next episode of the canceled Sonic movie series.
Baby, right by the motherfucking seaside, dog. Everything I see, I got a dream. I thought these leaves would go and take me out the dark. I know everything I wanted to follow.